Charles, this is going to be another epic episode. We have an incredibly important guest today. This is the opposite of Bud Light. We've got Bud Cummins, all the way from Arkansas. Bud, welcome to the show.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it is an honor. People can learn more about Bud just looking at his Wikipedia entry, and I'm sure he'll amplify that. Oftentimes, Wikipedia doesn't tell the complete story. It slants it the wrong way. But Bud was a U.S. attorney in Little Rock from 2001, I think, till 2006.
Correct.
And has a long and distinguished career in both politics and in the law and now in lobbying. He's involved, I think, and he's going to tell us a lot about a new situation that I think our audience will be very interested in, having to do with Ukraine, I believe. And with that, love to have you bring our audience up to date with where you are in your quest.
Well, I think the reason my name has bubbled up recently is because I had a role. Some have been referring to me as a whistleblower. I don't really think I fit the definition of a whistleblower, basically because I didn't ever blow a whistle. I mean, I was outed more than raising my hand and volunteering to tell a story. But in the basic story is this: in 2018, I was approached by some individuals that represented me, that they spoke on behalf of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, who had a desire to come quietly to the United States and have a peer-to-peer meeting with senior law enforcement at DOJ. And the suggestion was that he was going to bring actual documentary evidence and either affidavits, or actually bring live persons that were eyewitnesses to activities around the Hunter Biden Burisma transactions and allegedly bribery. And they also claimed to have evidence that U.S. officials under the Obama administration had encouraged Ukrainian officials to alter documents related to Paul Manafort's activities in Ukraine, to not only incriminate Manafort, but to remove Obama's former legal counsel, Gregory Craig's name from certain documents. Huh. Those were the allegations. I never saw the evidence. I'm not here today, sure. And never have tried to vouch for the evidence. That was the offer. And so I was tasked with, they asked me could I arrange the meeting with contact DOJ and let them know that they were wanting to make that presentation and see if I could arrange it.
And the reaction of, this is the Trump DOJ, right?
Yes, it is.
And the reaction of the Trump DOJ was no interest?
No interest. To put it in perspective, this all happened in the fall of 2018.
Sure.
I don't think anybody really had publicly talked about Hunter Biden and Burisma and to any great extent. I'm not sure you couldn't find some reference to it on the internet, but
right.
With the public statements by Rudy Giuliani, Victoria Tensing, some other lawyers came later in 2019. The president's call, I don't know the exact date, became, I think, the summer of 2019 to the president of Ukraine. Of course, then there was the impeachment. This all happened before that. This was an opportunity for the Department of Justice, without a lot of fanfare, to presumably, talk to some people and meet with some people to evaluate evidence supporting some allegations, some pretty serious crimes. At the time, there also more perspective on the timeline. This is after General Sessions has recused from the Russia probe. This is well into the Mueller investigation. In fact, I think it was only 2 or 3 or 4 months before the Mueller report came out. And I knew, I did have contacts from my time at DOJ that were highly placed at DOJ in the Attorney General's office and the Deputy Attorney General himself. But I also knew, just from reading the paper, this was going to be so politically charged, that in that environment that had already been created by the false allegations that led to the Russia probe and all the political maneuvering that forced the Attorney General to ill-advisedly recused from the matter, et cetera, that this was just going to be, very difficult for them to manage politically and not be accused of, mismanagement. So I ended up taking it for other reasons to the United States Attorney in the Southern District of New York. And so I laid out the allegations the best I understood them and the offer, and they said they'd get back to me, but I never heard back. And I followed up multiple times, with emails, but could never get a response out of them after that. So,
and was that Berman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Was that Berman
Yes,
as the
Jeff Berman?
Yeah.
And I knew Jeff. I didn't know him well, but I'd worked with him. And so, at the time, number one, look, I've been a very political guy. I've been on the, had media contacts. I've done my share of time as a, talking head on TV. So I had not only these legal contacts, I had political contacts, I had media contacts. So I had those options to take this issue or take this, these allegations. I'm a former United States attorney. And at the time, I took that very seriously. And I had the fact that I worked at DOJ, I take a lot of pride in that. And so I didn't want to put on the political hat or the media hat on this. I felt like these were serious allegations. They were unproven, and that it was appropriate for law enforcement to quietly, the way they're supposed to do investigations, evaluate it and determine what the appropriate next steps were without it being, publicly aired out. And so when they didn't respond, I was reluctant to go, try to do something else with the information. I just told the folks that asked me that, I wasn't able to help them. And, because I assumed at least one of three things was going on. I assumed they already had an investigation into these allegations and that they didn't want me,
to know,
interfering with that, or that they listened to me and said, well, we do want to hear from the Prosecutor General of Ukraine if he wants to talk to us, but we'll go to him directly. We don't need to go through Bud, and he's now a private citizen. We don't need to put him in this investigation loop. And the third thing that I thought, and frankly, in my gut, I was afraid that it was the fact, was that it was being politically stonewalled. And I think that that's probably what happened. Although today I still don't honestly know what happened.
But no, so you're familiar with the Comer interplay with Ray now over the is it $5 million bribe or $15 million? I forget. $5 million bribe.
But that he said it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Have you actually been to Ukraine?
I never have. I've done some legal work for Ukrainians, but I've never been to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And to be clear, the prosecutor that you're talking about is Yuri Lutsenko, not
Correct.
Victor Shokin, correct?
Correct. This was during the time of Lutsenko. Shokin had already been removed. He's the guy that Biden, demanded that they remove, or he would withhold $1 billion of aid. Inexplicably, I don't know that anybody's ever, if we can pause a minute and just talk about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've got a day job, so this isn't like my thesis. I don't research every single thing that's reported on this, but to my knowledge, no one has ever explained the position Biden clearly took, because he's on camera bragging about it, that he demanded that they fire this guy before they got the $1 billion. Well, that might have been policy. That might have been government policy. But if it was, there should be memos all over the State Department, FBI, documenting the problems they were having with this guy.
Right.
And there should have been, meetings where it was made a policy decision. We don't just fly people around the world to just arbitrarily demand that they remove high-ranking officials in their government. That wasn't just Joe Biden's authority on the fly. He surely, if there was a legitimate reason for them to demand that, there should be documentation leading up to that decision and the authorization for him as vice president to go demand it. To my knowledge, nobody's ever produced that or even asked for it. I don't know why, but sometimes the absence of evidence is the best evidence.
Exactly.
A decision like that just isn't made without documentation. These people in Washington are memo freaks. I mean, they paper, they're all Ivy League, educated, they'll 20 pages is never enough if 3 pages will do. I mean, they document everything. So right. There should be documentation leading up to that policy decision if it was a legitimate decision. Yeah. And I'm not aware of anybody going down that path.
Wow.
So basically, Biden makes those comments. Viktor Shokin is fired.
Right.
And then Yuri Lutsenko comes in after. What happened basically with Lutsenko? I mean, you brought this information. He approached you, and you said, hey, here's this guy. And then what happened?
Well, he approached me through intermediaries. I've never talked to or met Mr. Lutsenko.
Why did he choose you?
I think the intermediaries chose me. They were in Washington for other reasons, but they had this on their agenda. And someone they were meeting with they asked about who might be a person that could make that meeting happen, and who the person they met with said, "Well, Bud Cummins is in town, and he has a lot of contacts over there. Why don't you talk to him?" I think it was something like that, but I don't know. But and again, don't hold myself out as an expert on Ukrainian, government,
sure.
But during that time, it's pretty obvious that they were getting whipsawed pretty good by the Obama administration.
Sure.
We wanted to be in Ukraine.
They who? Ukrainians?
The entire government of Ukraine. I mean, it's a very corrupt place.
Right,
a lot of people there in government positions, ended up being multimillionaires or billionaires.
Right.
Clearly a lot of corruption going on. The United States government, I assume for national security purposes, wanted to be active in supporting Ukraine and keeping it stabilized. That always translates into a lot of my tax money, and they were giving it away hand over fist. But they knew they were pouring money into an extremely corrupt government and extremely corrupt environment. So they made an attempt to set up some safeguards. They put a huge FBI presence in the country, much larger than we usually have in foreign countries, and entered into an evidence sharing agreement with the anti-corruption agencies in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So presumably so the FBI could, kind of monitor what was going on. The allegations are that what that turned into was kind of a political, they were picking winners and losers.
Right.
And they weren't necessarily going after everybody that was corrupt. They were going after political opponents that they thought were corrupt.
Right.
And that for whatever reason, this fellow at Burisma, whose name escapes me right now,
Slavchevsky,
pro-Russian. By the way, the guys Hunter Biden was working for were the pro-Russian guys. They weren't pro-Ukrainian. They were pro-Russian guys.
Was it Mykola
for some reason
Zlochevsky?
Guy? Zlochevsky. So he was trying to buy his way into getting a free pass because he was under investigation. I think Lutsenko may have actually. I don't know. I can't remember. I think when he took office, he saw what happened to Shokin. I think he shut down the investigation, maybe reopened it later. But everybody there was getting jerked around by the our ambassador and the FBI. And I think they were tired of it because they were seeing that it wasn't legitimate.
Right.
If in fact it's true that they were being asked to set up Paul Manafort, if in fact it's true that they were being asked to, turn a blind eye to Hunter Biden and Devin Archer and Christopher Hines and, other people that were tooling around with their hands out, then I think that, they were probably getting tired of that, and that may have led to Lutsenko reaching out, wanting to come direct. They did not trust the U.S. officials in Ukraine. That was clear.
So they're
smart. Was the whole premise. That was the whole premise, that the ambassador was still Obama's appointee.
Right.
He stayed in there for quite a while after Trump got elected. That the FBI were acting on her direction, and that they couldn't trust anybody over there. They needed to bring this evidence directly to the United States and meet with somebody at DOJ to get around that bias. That was the whole premise of the request.
That's very interesting. I am not a political hand, though I studied politics, sadly at an Ivy League university, but I don't like long memos, though. But what we're seeing, I think, here is very, very interesting. We're seeing, back when I got out of college in 1978, it was tough to make money in American politics. I mean, if you want to make money, you either invent a new product or service, you go to Wall Street, you become a consultant maybe, or maybe you get into venture capital, private equity. You don't become a senator in Delaware and have 2 mansions and have all this money, and your kids are getting all these favors, and nobody's checking anything, and nobody seems to care, and everybody there's so much, it's not smoke. There are raging infernos around this Biden family. So many different levels. And I suspect that if you will never be in this position, but let's say the alternative universe version of you got into Biden's position. As a Republican, you would be tortured by the mainstream media.
Oh, yeah.
And possibly incarcerated for a small fraction of what it is alleged is going on with the Biden family. It's just, the contrast between the treatment is so stark. And I'm not a lawyer either, but it almost comes close to gutting the integrity that one should have in the idea that the justice system is administered without bias.
It has completely gutted the integrity of that notion. I mean, I like I said, I'm former DOJ and take great pride in that, and you know, probably the most important thing I've gotten to do in my career. And I honestly can't trust. You know, I don't trust. I used to tell people, you know, in instances that if, you know, they could trust the FBI, if they were dealing with the FBI and the FBI was asking them to cooperate, it was okay. You know, I don't tell people that anymore. I've just seen too many times that people get double crossed, too many misrepresentations. Wow. And it breaks my heart, but that's, you know, I can't tell people that, you know, are there great people working in the FBI today? Sure. Lots of them, thousands of them. But the leadership has gone astray, the culture has gone astray. And it's not just political cases. There's other cases that I could point to that I'm aware of. And you know, I work in a fairly small universe. I'm licensed in DC, but I mostly, certainly since COVID, spend most of my time in Arkansas. So if I can touch and feel 3 or 4 cases that I'm really concerned about, how many are there out there where there's, you know, been misconduct? And they're not all political. A lot of them are political, but they're not all political. You know, I'll tell you one I'm working on right now I can talk about is,
sure.
You may remember, if you may have seen on HBO, there's a series called The Vow, and it's about this fellow named Keith Raniere that was a self-help guy. And so they prosecuted him. NXIVM, accused him of, you know, all kinds of wrongdoing. But really, that case, if you study it from a legal, whether you like Keith Raniere, don't like him, or, you know, think he's creepy or think he was a con man or whatever, if you look at the case that they brought from a legal basis, it was pretty strange. It was, you know, like a RICO conspiracy where this guy was committing these kind of negligible, you know, in a RICO, you have to have these underlying criminal conduct that supports this conspiracy. And the underlying criminal conduct was pretty pedestrian. And this conspiracy was just some thing about promoting Keith Raniere. And, you know, it was just hard to really follow and understand, but it got a lot better when they were able to introduce evidence that he had nude pictures of an underage girl on his camera. Then there was, you know, it's basically producing child porn. All the co-defendants pled guilty because they couldn't sit next to a guy that was accused of child porn, and he gets convicted and sent to prison for a long time, 100+ years, I think, which I think is kind of outrageous in and of itself. A first-time nonviolent offender gets over 100 years. But the point is, post-trial, it comes to the attention of the defense team, and now 7 forensic computer experts, including 4 former FBI, have signed sworn affidavits that to a reasonable scientific certainty, that camera evidence was tampered with.
Wow, that's horrible.
Yeah, so the FBI put that on there, maybe,
or it was in there. It was in their custody. I mean, you know, I'm not in a position to accuse, and I don't think the experts are in a position to say it had to be an FBI person. But what's troubling to me about it is you have 7 experts, all qualified, all, you know, either have or could testify in court as experts without qualification, saying it's been tampered with. And those affidavits were put in motions and filed in court months and months and months ago. And the court just sat on them, didn't require the government to respond to it.
Sure.
Now, just recently, they've ordered a response, but, we'll wait and see if the government actually responds to the substance of the allegations or tries to use some procedural bar to, allowing him to raise it at, at this late in the game. But if I was the United States attorney or I was a federal judge and somebody said, hey, it looks like you tried a case for over a month and put a guy in prison for over 100 years and the government may have tampered with the evidence, I wouldn't wait around for procedure to determine if that happened and rectify it, if that was the case. And their willingness to just, my point is that's not a political case, but it was a high profile case.
Sure.
And how about the Varsity Blues cases? You got all these.
Wait, before you get off of NXIVM, wasn't it kind of a political case because there was all that other stuff with him branding women and stuff with this? And then,
if that's political, I don't know how political that is. It
the reason
sensational.
It becomes political is because the Trump porn star here, this is her, Stormy, what's her name, was branded with the NXIVM brand.
I don't know about that. That's news to me that she was involved in it.
And the other piece of it is that there were Claire Bronfman was a very important element in the Clinton Foundation scandal, Bronfman family, and others are connected. There's connections between NXIVM and Clinton Foundation donors as well.
Well, I'm not aware of that. I don't know. I'm not up to date on that. I know I have also looked at Claire Bronfman's case and her sentence. And again, I have to say, even as a former prosecutor, it's just outrageous. The length of her sentence, I think she was put in pretrial home detention with a bracelet and $100 million cash bond for like 2 years before trial, and then got a sentence that, I can't remember, that 7-8 years, something like that. And, for somebody, and her crime basically is being rich and supporting this guy, believing in this guy and allowing him to use her financial resources. That's what you got. And she still apparently is loyal to the guy. And that, you and I may or may not agree with her decision to think Keith Raniere is a great guy, but to me, she just is a case of overreach. And I think it's because it's a sensational case. The FBI is a government agency. They've got a budget. They've got to justify it. They've got to go out and try to get more money every year, and they chase headlines. And I think their individual agents and the U.S. Department of Justice, the lawyers, they're rewarded and recognized for convictions like that.
Right.
And I'm afraid that there's situations where they rationalize that they're the good guys and they're after a bad guy, and they may bend the rules. We'll see in that case. Yeah. But I was about to say, you can look at those Varsity Blues cases, the wealthy people who bribe volleyball coaches or whatever to get their kids in Harvard. That's arrogant and all kinds of things. And most of us probably look down our nose and say, judgmentally, and say those people, that was wrong and they should be embarrassed. Their kids should be thrown out. But who would have thought that was a federal crime? And in fact, the few people who could take the risk of going to trial recently had their cases reversed because apparently it's not a federal crime. But that's headline chasing and it's just abuse. Look, it's a discretionary job if you're a prosecutor. It's not for me to sit here and say, oh, they shouldn't have prosecuted that guy or they should prosecute that guy. But in certain instances, they are demonstrating that they have a two-tiered, system of justice. You can't look at the way they approach Hillary Clinton's emails, the Clinton Foundation, Hunter Biden, and compare it to Paul Manafort, Roger Stone,
Trump,
and anybody that's, and again, I could name you cases that you haven't heard of, local political corruption cases, and you cannot come to the conclusion that they're whatever their process is for making these discretionary calls, that they're using a uniform system. It's obviously biased, and it's got to stop because people are losing faith in their government.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Up until I got involved with the Clinton Foundation, which was really February, March 2015, a friend of ours knew that I knew how to look through financial statements and couldn't figure out what the hell the Clinton Foundation was actually doing, and said, well, why don't you look at their audits and the other financial information and see if you spot any irregularities. So I wrote a piece in Breitbart that got, I think, 84,000 Facebook likes or shares or something like that, and got a certain amount of attention. And two other pieces that got less attention before Hillary announced. One on Teneo, which I think is a corrupt enterprise that Doug Band, with no qualifications, set up while in the post-presidency to offer investment banking services and consulting services and communication services, which I believe is the way in which corrupt people purchase influence, purchase and sell influence. You give somebody a contract for communications. I mean, what does that mean, really? It's not like legal services. It's not like certain banking services. And the guy has no experience or staff to provide communication services. So it's just a way for donors to get close to Clinton.
Sure.
Anyway, so I wrote a piece on that. And I wrote a piece about Abedin and the secret emails. And what I've noticed as so hopefully I will spend my whole life not involved with the criminal justice system. That's why I don't want to be anywhere near it.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I've been in a lot of prisons, but I've never spent the night in one, and I'm trying to finish my run in that way.
But an observation I would have is, to me, as more a numbers person, the legal justice system doesn't really seem to want to get to the heart of the issue, which in my mind, in regard to the Clinton Foundation, who was involved, and why did the Clinton campaign and the Obama administration countenance the idea that our Secretary of State would not only transact all of her business over private systems, but then would leave office with all of those communications and amendments and all that other stuff. While she was there, she wouldn't have an inspector general. While she was there, she wouldn't have, she would be in control of USAID funding, which was the first time that happened. So she would have all this money, and for the entire time, after April 25th, 2005 to the present, the Clinton Foundation does not have bylaws, is not a public charity, is in violation of all these agreements with the National Archives. There are all kinds of problems with the numbers that I won't bury you with because it's not fair to do this without you looking at it. And nobody is putting these two things together and say, the reason they did these emails this way was to hide crimes or hide allegations of potential crimes, and to not make it possible to see what's really going on with the Clinton Foundation. As you described, in these things that there are internal memos that you expect to see. I know when it comes to a foundation that Bill Gates doesn't just write a check for $100 million to the Clinton Foundation. There are memos, there are proposals, there are negotiations, agreements, after action. All that stuff's missing.
Right. And I'm not really abreast of all those details about the Clinton Foundation. I think I know from talking to former colleagues, that there has been conflict within the Department of Justice about whether and how to look at the Clinton Foundation. Some people would say it was investigated. Other people would say it really has never been investigated. There was a sham. And I wasn't there. I can't say one way or the other. But I can tell you this. What we know about the Clinton Foundation, what we know about Hunter Biden, is you clearly have circumstantial evidence that an appearance of impropriety. Now, I think most people would want to see more. They'd want to see quid pro quo. They'd want to see evidence of a corrupt bargain, those kind of things. But I can tell you this. The Department of Justice doesn't need to see that when they just take some guy off the street or out here in one of these state legislatures and they think they can pop him for political corruption. They're putting people in front of juries all the time based entirely on circumstantial evidence and daring them to convince a jury that they're not a corrupt politician because money went here, something else happened over here. it might be legal, but it might be corrupt. They don't hesitate at all
Right.
to put those people in front of juries. So that's my point. I'm not really going to,
Sure.
It's not for me to sit here and say that each one of those prosecutions is wrong or that they should have prosecuted Bill and Hillary Clinton or Hunter Biden. But I can just tell you, there's enough data here for you to step back and go, well, they use two different decision trees when they get to these decisions because they're not consistent when it comes to Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah. Jason,
I heard today, and you may have heard that they've now announced an investigation or charges against
Ray?
Senator Mnuchin's opponent, Justice.
Oh, Manchin. John Justice?
Manchin. Yeah, Manchin. Who's running against him? His potential political opponent apparently is now under investigation by DOJ.
Oh, that's we went out and sat down with Nate Kane in West Virginia. We went out to West Virginia 3 or 4 weeks ago.
I don't think that's his name. Somebody just kind of whispered that in my ear, so I don't have much information on that. It's just and I'm representing some people in a case I can't talk about. I can just tell you, if this bias exists, and I believe it does, they haven't, the Durham report. You would think you'd read the Durham report, and everybody at DOJ and FBI would go, "Oh my God, this is awful. We gotta just make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's so nobody can accuse us tomorrow of being, so we can deny that we're biased." They are not doing that. They have their foot flat on the gas pedal, as far as I can tell, and they're continuing today to do that kind of thing. Did you find something about it?
Jim Justice. So the guy's name is Jim Justice. That's what's confusing. He's being brought to justice.
But Jim Justice, I think, is actually a larger-than-life individual. I mean, he's a gigantic person, and he's also a billionaire, I believe. He's a very wealthy man.
So this says Republicans are coming to an increasingly popular consensus. Governor Jim Justice is by far the best candidate to take on Joe Manchin. But
do you see any evidence? Do you see any news today about him being under investigation?
We can Justice, you think? So we put Jim Justice.
Federal investigation. He's requested. It says West Virginia lawmaker requests federal investigation into money transfer by Governor Justice.
It's a Republican requesting this.
Wow.
Well, I think maybe what I heard is inside baseball and it didn't hit the news yet. Maybe we just may have broken the news, but my understanding is that the Department of Justice is now sticking their nose under that tent.
Well, I have one question, Jason, unless you want to go a different direction. I'm curious, what can you tell us about what it's like to be a U.S. attorney? I mean, is it how much authority do you have? How does your day, week, month end up looking like when you're a U.S. attorney?
Well, I think most U.S. attorneys will tell you it's the best job they've ever had, and I've heard that from U.S. attorneys that went on to be governors and senators and other things. You have a lot of responsibility. You have a lot of discretion and authority. In the wrong hands, it's pretty
dangerous,
breathtaking, pretty dangerous. But it also depends on who you're working for, who the attorney general is in particular, and who the president is. I was fortunate enough to spend most of my time as a United States attorney serving under Attorney General John Ashcroft.
Right.
And a couple of things about John Ashcroft. Number one, every person before they were confirmed had to go meet with him one-on-one, or actually him and the Deputy Attorney General two-on-one. And the whole purpose of that meeting was for him to look you in the eye. And as far as I know, he gave the same talk to all of us. But, mine went something like this. He said, "Bud, I'm looking at your resume, and you have, I'd been a congressional candidate. I'd been involved in Republican politics, and I'd worked for, I'd been chief legal counsel for Governor Mike Huckabee." And he said, "You have a very political resume, and that's fine." He said, "But I have a political resume." Obviously he'd been governor and senator and all kinds of things, but I believe he was governor of Missouri. He was definitely a senator. And so But he said, but I've studied the history of the Department of Justice, and every time, it's found itself in the ditch or been embarrassed, it's because people lost track of the line that can't be crossed between politics and justice. And certainly, he made it clear, and it was clear. There are you're a political appointee of the president. There are legitimate political activities for a United States attorney. For instance, George W. Bush, before 9/11, our number one priority, it became our number two priority after 9/11, was to go out and prosecute as many federal gun crimes as we could. And so when I spoke to a community group, I was going to talk about the president's priority to prosecute federal gun crimes. I was going to brag about our statistics of how many people we prosecuted in my district and how it had affected the impact of violent crime in my district. But when it came to making individual decisions about cases, you can't take politics into account. And if they're political cases, and we had some, I think, it's incumbent on you as U.S. Attorney to make sure your investigation team is balanced politically and you don't accidentally have a whole bunch of fire breathers from one party or the other making all the decisions without somebody else in the room that can help them identify when they're getting off the rails. It's not that hard. I mean, to organize it that way. And it's amazing to me that people like Jim Comey and McCabe and Strzok and those people could get so far out there and not, recognize how far out they were. But to answer your question, it's a great job. It's a lot of responsibility, and under an attorney general. The other thing I was going to tell you about Ashcroft is he believed in pushing the authority back out to the 93 judicial districts and not trying to pull it all into the main justice. There's a gravitational pull to the main justice. They want every week they add things to the list of things you have to ask permission for before you can do them as a U.S. attorney. And generally speaking, General Ashcroft looked at it the other way. He thought we were the strength of the system and pushed a lot of authority, especially after 9/11. We had a lot of responsibility and a lot of authority in every office to stand up, a counterterrorism, domestic counterterrorism program that didn't exist before 9/11.
So let's say, I'm just trying to understand what should be going on with the Hunter Biden situation. Let's say, put you in a different time, you're U.S. attorney under Bill Clinton, which you wouldn't have been, I don't think. But
not likely.
No, yeah. And in this mythical time, as a U.S. attorney, you discover that you have evidence, or somehow you find out that the president has taken a $5 million bribe, and you've got to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go and you speak directly to the attorney general about it? Is there?
Yeah, something like that. You're going to run up the flagpole pretty quick and make sure that the attorney general's office is aware of the investigation and that you're getting guidance from the criminal chief and just so you don't accidentally get too far afield or get in front of the administration. Hopefully you're not going to get a lot of political input back about backing off or going forward. That seems to be what's happened now or they just they may do it through FBI. This FBI does nothing. They're supposed to go out and initiate investigation. Nothing happens. That's apparently happened in some cases.
That seems to be all that happens.
But in the case where I took the information to the Southern District of New York, I fully expected him to notify Main Justice that the meeting occurred, but I fully expected him to be skeptical. We haven't talked about the fact that a year after that encounter where I failed to get the meeting set up, Herman was not a year after. Well, no, just 6 months ago, I got a notice from Apple that a year after I attempted to set up that meeting, they dropped a subpoena on Apple for my information. I didn't get notified for 3 more years because it was a delayed notice process.
That seems outrageous.
Wait. So they subpoenaed Apple wanting exactly what?
Well, I don't know.
Your iCloud stuff?
probably, I can only speculate because you just don't see. The notice said, hey, Southern District of New York asked for your
Are you an iPhone user, Bud?
Yes.
Okay, so that's it. There's encryption in the iPhone that the FBI hates. That's why they wanted Apple to break the San Bernardino.
Well, what they probably wanted from Apple, maybe, they might have wanted access to my iCloud, although I don't think I used the iCloud back then. They probably, in my case, it was a subpoena. So they might have only wanted my carrier information to know if I was with Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile. And then they would have taken a subpoena.
On them.
Then they could go to put a subpoena on them.
Right.
And they would have, with a subpoena, they can get basically what you'd see in your phone bill. The numbers I called, the numbers that called me, and the frequency, the actual calls, how long they were, when they were, and how frequently. I suspect they were wanting to see who I was talking to during that time.
Isn't that pretty bad for them to just do? And by the way, have you heard about the use of national security letters? You're talking about subpoenas,
yes.
But the FBI had a general counsel from 2003 to 2011 by the name of Valerie Caproni. And she's currently a U.S. District Court judge in the Southern District of New York. And when she was being confirmed, Chuck Grassley admonished her for like thousands of violations of the First and Fourth Amendment by issuing these national security letters and inventing out of whole cloth, according to Democrat Congressional Representative John Conyers. She just invented these exigent letters where once she finds out from Apple that you're using AT&T, Verizon, or whatever, they don't need a subpoena. They just send one of these national security letters and they can get all kinds of information about what you're doing with the phone.
Yeah, look, I've been a Republican my entire adult life. I'm a conservative, and I think I'm a law and order person. But the last 10 years or so have taught me that, when I was a United States attorney, we're trying to get the Patriot Act enacted. And the Department of Justice marched me out to talk about it publicly a lot because I had a conservative Democrat senator that was considered a swing vote in my state. So they marched me out to tell people, hey, these are tools we need. They're very intrusive, but, you can trust us. We're fighting terrorism. We're trying to protect your security. I wouldn't give those speeches today.
Yeah, good for you.
We've given the government way too much power to investigate us because what we've learned is you don't know who's going to inherit that power next and how they're going to use it. And it's been abundantly clear that the Democrats in the last 8 years have abused those authorities and for blatantly political purposes. And we've given too much power to the Department of Justice to force guilty pleas. The sentencing guidelines need to be evaluated. We all want, a lot of this stuff when it's passed by Republicans, to a great extent, we're picturing organized crime. We're picturing violent drug cartels and gangs, but we're not realizing that they're going to turn around and use the same tools and the same, power on white collar business people, political corruption case allegations where you got people that are nonviolent, first time offenders that are in these gray areas, which you and I may, we may not like it that a politician is doing this or, Clarence Thomas is getting his, beach trips paid for, but it may or may not be a crime. And we don't want to give the power to the government to go create crimes where they see conduct they don't approve of. And that's happening every day. So I think those of us on the conservative side have to go rethink, but a lot of it can be cured by just, judges need to recognize that they can't always, when I was a U.S. attorney, I would suggest to the judge, look, you got a guy that's been accused of a crime saying one thing and my FBI just saying another. Who are you going to believe, Judge? You got to believe the FBI. Well, they've kind of screwed that up for us. I mean, because they've been caught lying too many times here.
Right.
And
You talking about the judges or the FBI? Because I think
well,
they're both a problem.
the judges have to understand that they can't just default to believing everything the government's telling them,
Right.
and they need to question some of these prosecutions. I mean, I've sat through guilty pleas where if the judge would have just asked 5 questions, he would have quickly realized that the person in front of him didn't believe one bit that they'd committed a crime, but they were being forced to come in and take a
Right.
plea because of the cost of going to trial and the extreme penalties if you go to trial and get convicted versus pleading guilty. I mean, for some people, it's 4, 5, 6 times longer in prison, and they just can't afford to take the risk to get their day in court. I think, somebody wants their day in court, they ought to be able to
Sure.
get it if they have an argument to make. There's just a distinction between, a bank robber where 20 witnesses say that's the guy, and we got him on camera, and we caught him outside with the dye pack all over his face. That's different than a business person or a politician who says, well, this is what I did. The facts aren't really in dispute, but this is what I thought I was doing at the time, and I didn't. They ought to at least be able to make their case to a jury.
Sure.
And they're not being afforded those cases. The few cases that are going to trial, the government's not faring that well.
Yeah.
But most people can't afford the risk.
Yeah, it's interesting you both mentioned judges and FBI agents. When I started on the Clinton Foundation stuff, I was able to get to Judge Andrew Napolitano. And I appreciate he was not a federal judge or anything, but I said to him, he supposedly was friendly with senior FBI people. I only know one FBI person, or knew at that time one FBI person who retired. And I said, I'm going to do this no matter what you tell me, because I think it's a massive fraud. But do you trust the FBI? Do you trust the senior level of the FBI? You might trust the line agents. This is back in 2015. And we've all seen Judge Knapp on his podcast and before that on TV. He's always a very glib guy, with his answers. He didn't immediately say, absolutely. I mean, he couldn't tell me right away, yes, I have absolute trust. These are good law and order people. And with that, I abandoned my theory of taking my information about the Clinton Foundation to the FBI because I figured they'd just sit on it. And that was actually later confirmed. You mentioned Victoria Tensing. Her husband arranged to have a meeting where people supposedly from the Little Rock FBI office met with him to go over my work in, I think, 2017 or 18, I forget which. And he called me up and he said, would you be willing to meet with the FBI? I said, yeah, here are my numbers. Never heard from him. Nothing.
Well, not on that.
Until they decided that maybe I was the money behind that. Remember that Peter Smith guy who died, was looking for emails. He was a Republican operative.
I don't remember that one.
They decided that as Mueller was heating up, 2 FBI agents called me out of the blue and said, can we see you? And I said, sure. Like now. I said, well, where are you? Well, we're in Washington. We're in a car and we want to drive up to see you right now. Can we do that? Sure, no problem. What do you want to talk about? Whatever you want to talk about, I'll talk. Anyway, we had a conversation. They were trying to put me in the chain of money to free Assange and get these emails. And unfortunately, I had conclusive evidence that I had not been over to meet in London.
Unfortunately for them.
Yeah, for them. Yeah. I had a passport with me, and my wife was literally dying, ex-wife was literally dying, and I hadn't left the country in 6 years. But I used that meeting as an opportunity to say, why aren't you guys investigating the Clinton Foundation? And they just would say, well, that's not our charter. It's not our mission.
Area of interest.
It's not our area of interest. But every answer to the question they posed, I would bring it back to the Clinton Foundation. It was like the opposite of the way I conduct business, or if you've got a problem that's staring you in the face, you either conclude you can't address it and you'll suffer the consequence, or you try to address it. So,
right. Well, look, there's lots of good people in federal law enforcement, and I've got a lot of. You said you only know one guy in the FBI. I know lots of them, and they get mad at me when I publicly criticize them. But that in my view, they've crossed the line. I mean, it was very hard for me to cross that line publicly and in media, and even criticized Jim Comey early on. I was trying to make excuses for him, blame it on Loretta Lynch, but the evidence is overwhelming that we've put the wrong. Look, you go back and study Watergate, which
Right.
are 2 or 3 generations have been taught that that was the most corrupt president this country's ever had, and all the horrible things, and I thank God for the reporters and the people that dug it out. Go look at a list of all the wrongful action that was uncovered in Watergate. It's all campaign stuff. The committee to reelect the president was financing it. It was all those morons, to break into a guy's office, a Democrat, it was all outside of government. And only when Nixon tried to get, I think, the CIA to help influence the FBI and get him off his back, did everybody basically bail on him and say, Mr. President, you can't use the government for political purposes like that. And the Republicans basically gave up on him, and he resigned.
But
That
there
pales
was
in comparison to what we know now about how FBI, DOJ, State Department, Treasury, 51 former Intel guys signing a blatantly false letter for political purposes. I mean, that's using the government for political purposes in massive ways, much more serious than anything that came up in Watergate ever.
I agree.
And it's being basically turning a blind eye to it. And it's got to stop, because people have to believe in their government. They have to believe somebody comes and, hauls your dad off in handcuffs, that they at least have good faith belief that dad's broken the law, not that he voted for the wrong person or ran for the wrong office or, whatever else might be motivating them wrongfully. People have to believe that the basic core law enforcement mechanism in the justice system is fair and unbiased. And right now, I think they're having a hard time believing that.
Well, another thing that I'm not a lawyer. Unfortunately, I have had a lot of time with lawyers in commercial matters. In this country, I believe, unless something's changed and I didn't get the message, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Oh, yeah, that changed. You didn't get the message?
The idea that you get into a criminal justice matter and the government doesn't make your case, successfully make the case against you, that you then, even though you're innocent, have to try to get yourself exonerated. That's just rubbish, right?
Well, and that's kind of what I'm alluding to. You really don't have the opportunity to prove your innocence unless you just, money is no object.
Right.
But, even those people who weather the storm and go to trial in some of these cases that, shouldn't be brought, very few of them have their lives, their careers intact when it's over. It's a very, very, we got to have prosecutors and we got to have investigators, but we need better judgment about how, when we have a case and when we don't. Right. And I'm just afraid the culture right now, especially in political cases, that they decide, for wrong reasons how to proceed, and it's gotten pretty bad.
Right. Well, in a magical universe where conservatives, forget about Republicans, Democrats. I used to be a Republican and I left, and I'm independent. I don't like either party. I don't like those type of parties. Let's look forward to January 20th, 2025, and let's assume the forces of good triumph, and we get the House, the Senate, and the executive branch. Could you be persuaded to be part of the solution to getting the Justice Department or the FBI or both back towards the right path?
I love public service, and I would love to go, if somebody really gave me a mandate to go shake up those agencies from top to bottom. I don't think anybody's ever going to do that, but if they would, I'd love to be part of that, because I think it's really important, and I think they're important agencies, and it wouldn't be that difficult to get them turned around if somebody was willing. But you'd have to shake up the culture, you'd have to shake up the management.
You'd have to get 93 new U.S. attorneys, most likely.
Change some laws.
Every president, every new, at least when the party changes, everybody everybody gets changed out. That's part of the deal. And I'd make a case that that's important too. They need to have political appointees in there that are accountable to how the world works and not just entrenched bureaucrats.
Just a quick little speed round in the last few minutes that we have with you, Bud. There are some questions from our viewers in the chat. There was a story in 2018 that alleged that the FBI and the IRS had packed a DOJ 757 with boxes of Clinton Foundation evidence in Arkansas. Are you aware of this happening?
I don't have any information on that part.
Yeah.
All right. And then the next thing people want to know about is, before there was Durham, there was this guy, John Huber, Utah Attorney General, investigating claims of FBI misconduct. Did you ever interface with him or know anything about the investigation he was doing?
No, I don't. I don't know John Huber, and I don't really know that they ever. I don't even know what happened with that investigation. If it just quietly got shut down, or if they're still active. I don't know the answer to that.
I think he shut it down and went away. And then the last thing, you mentioned that you had brought this information to Jeffrey Berman. He's an interesting guy. I don't know if you've had a chance to read his book, Holding the Line. Did you read that book?
No.
It's a good book. He talks quite a bit about his interactions with William Barr. Have you dealt with Barr much?
No, I've never dealt with General Barr.
It seems like he was really blocking Jeffrey Berman.
Might
and
be.
Berman didn't realize that.
I don't, it's, Barr was in a situation that I kind of found myself in to some extent. I mean, you kind of a DOJ loyalist, how things have always been done. If you're doing it right, there's always somebody on the outside, a defense attorney or somebody still accusing you of doing it wrong. So you kind of, develop a thick skin about that. And I think he maybe was a little slow to believe or understand how bad it was. And he was trying to, maintain the status quo and deal with things as they came up. But, I think it looked to me like over time he became aware. But, people talk about the deep state. I don't know if William Barr is part of the deep state. To me, a big part of it is just people that are Washington insiders. He's been up there a long time. He's held these, positions of high esteem. He's, highly credentialed, and those people kind of tend to congregate up there, and they're not real big on this kind of thing of, shaking up the agency and trying to really figure out who's doing something wrong. They kind of like things to just keep going like they're going.
Yeah.
And so, he may fall into that group a little bit, Chris Wray and Barr and some of those guys. It's not that they're for the wrongdoing, but they're also a little bit married to the status quo, and they don't want to shake up things too much, maybe.
Yeah. Do you give any?
That's just kind of my outsider's view looking in. But
do you give any
they put me in there, it's going to get shook.
It's going to be what?
I said, if they would ever put me in there, the tree's going to get shook.
There we go. I'd love to see that happen. Have you considered any of William Barr's involvement with Iran-Contra and the stuff going on in Mena, Arkansas? It seems like he was involved in pardoning Casper Weinberger, and there was like 5 other guys. Very, very controversial.
8 people.
8 people.
I'm really not, I haven't gone back. I vaguely remember some of those things that you're talking about, but I'm not, I don't have any opinions or information about that. I don't really remember all the facts.
So do you live currently in Arkansas, or are you DC, or both?
Yeah, I live in Little Rock.
Uh-huh. Have you been through the Clinton Foundation building?
Yes. And I will tell you without qualification that, I have a certain level of respect for Bill Clinton. I mean, it's undeniable. He's a brilliant guy, an incredible politician. I mean, 2 of the best politicians in the world that I've ever seen come from a little town called Hope, Arkansas, Mike Huckabee and Bill Clinton. I mean, two different flavors of guys, but both are highly intelligent, skilled communicators. I mean, you can give credit where credit's due. He has certain, I've had more chances to vote for him than you have because I was here when he was governor too. And I still haven't taken advantage of that opportunity yet. I've never voted for him. But his decision to put that library in Little Rock was an amazing gift to the city. It's anchored the redevelopment of
Right.
a good part of half the downtown of Little Rock, our riverfront, which was way underutilized as far as its potential, has been developed because of that anchor, of the Clinton. And you can't imagine how many people travel to the Clinton Foundation every day from all over the country. People go to these presidential libraries, so it brings a lot of people to Little Rock. So it's a great, great asset. And I've been in it and toured it many times. I was at the opening. I was the United States Attorney when it was open. I was actually had the opportunity to be in a back room, a holding room. It was pouring down rain that day. Just, it was awful. The day before was beautiful.
Right.
The day of the opening, and we had all these celebrities in town, and they were all just standing out there, just getting. There was no tents or anything, just getting drenched. And I was in the holding room with the Secret Service detail, and all the living presidents except Gerald Ford, and that was just probably 15, 20 people in the whole room, and I sat back there for an hour and a half, 2 hours with them, and just kind of was a fly on the wall and listened to him chat. So that was a great experience, a little fun thing I got to do when I was U.S. Attorney. So, but yes, the Clinton Foundation, Clinton Library is a great asset. I think probably any presidential library is to a community, and I'm really glad he put it here.
Well, you've been very kind with your time, sir, and already made enormous contributions to the country. I hope you'll get a chance to do some more work and do some shaking of some very large, unfortunately wobbly trees. Jason, do you have any?
No, that's it. I really want to thank you for joining us, Bud, and for your service as a U.S. Attorney and all the other stuff that you've done. And thank you for sharing this information with us. Anything else you wanted to discuss? Any websites?
I appreciate you all very much inviting me on. And I guess I would just say again, no matter what else I say, critical of the agencies and the culture, the individuals that are serving at DOJ and FBI, by and large, are great people, and they're in it for the right reasons. I just think, the leadership, the politics has seeped in, and it's got to be, it's got to be fixed.
Well, we'll count on you. We hope to do some of that fixing.
And certainly our viewers who are interested in following Bud on Twitter, looks like you got an excellent duck hunt going there with a very good-looking dog. But people can follow Bud at Bud Cummins AR. He is an attorney and a lobbyist, and former.
You can see I don't have very many followers. I actually took down my Twitter account for a long time, and only recently doesn't have the date. Within the last year or so,
look at that, just January.
I started and I got back on Twitter, but I got a little. I had a fair amount of followers, but I got a little tired of the harassment. But I now engage with Twitter with a whole new attitude and never allow myself to debate people on Twitter, and it's a lot happier experience.
Good. I don't imagine you are familiar with the Twitter coup, but I'll email this to you. This describes this contains my allegations and supportive evidence that I believe are going to prove that this guy, Adam Sharp, Twitter's first U.S. government liaison, in cooperation with Barack Obama, and the first in history FBI General Counsel, Valerie Caproni, I think these three individuals are more responsible than anyone else for inserting the FBI into Twitter. I'll send this to you. I hope you'll have time to look at it. And thank you very much for joining us today, Bud.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. That was great.
There you go, Charles. Bud.
Fantastic.
Cummins. Excellent.
Individual, I think. It was our first meeting, but he's just a
great
one
guy.
Of the kind of law and order people I like to see. I don't think it was fair. Would have been fairer for us to start diving into the Clinton Foundation investigation that occurred under his watch, because that's, we should have talked about that.
Well, we don't really do pre-interviews to keep it
right.
Now, what we could do, Charles, and this is completely up to you and your schedule, is that, we've had an episode here that satisfies the people who want in-apartment stuff. We've satisfied people who want free stuff. We have an opportunity.
Let's do that.
You want to go for a walk? So,
Yeah.
okay, we're going to do a little walk. We just need a few minutes to set it up here, but we will be back in the First Amendment Forum. People can join us there. Give it about 10 minutes on odyssey.com/@crowdsourcethetruth, crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com, and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Huge thank you to everybody who is sponsoring the show. We wouldn't be able to talk to people like Bud Cummins if it weren't for the viewer sponsors, because I'd be broke and probably getting choked out on the subway by now if it weren't for you guys. So thanks, everybody.